Prasad will be telling us how to present a case of diabetic retinopathy and what are its variations in the exams.
Thank you, Dr. KP. And that was a good presentation, Dr. Sandhya. I think Dr. Sandhya has made my job easier in giving us a lot of tips about how to present a case if it is a retina case, how to present an exam. So I will probably concentrate more on the discussion of the case than on the presentation of the case, but I will make an effort to present also and give you some highlights about what to emphasize on in a presentation. So the history is very important, and this is common to all retina cases. Loss of vision, whether it was sudden, rapid, or onset, I think this has already been alluded to by Dr. Sandhya. Flashes and floaters is something that I would like to emphasize. In a retina case, in a non-retina case, it may not be of much significance, but in a retina case, because of the fact that the retina and the vitreous are always in a state of tug of war, there is always some traction at the points of attachment, and therefore the significance of flashes and floaters comes in here. Flashes are basically due to the traction, even due to the saccadic movements of the eye, and floaters are because of the small bleeds, micro bleeds that occur when the vitreous pulls off these small capillaries, which are sometimes weak, or it could be from a small tear or a hole in the peripheral retina because of the vitreoretinal attachments again. So flashes and floaters are important to ask for. History of systemic illness is very important, diabetes mellitus and its comorbidities, meaning the complications due to diabetes. Like, for example, you should also ask about nephropathy, you should ask about neuropathy, you should ask about diabetic foot, you should ask about IHD, you should ask about coexisting hypertension. Hypertension, in fact, is present in 70% of patients who have diabetes, and any infections in the body, and any other for that matter. Any treatment for the systemic illness that the patient has been taking, and what treatment the patient is taking, and whether the treatment is successful in controlling the systemic condition. Any history of prolonged drug intake, for example, chloroquine maculopathy. So just to give an example, so a long-term use of chloroquine can result in maculopathy, and therefore a history of any drug intake over a period of time. For example, an anti-tuberculosis treatment for even 6 to 8 months can cause ethambutol toxicity in optic neuritis, causing loss of vision without any fundus changes. So you might sometimes wonder why the patient is not able to see. And one history of simple question of whether the patient has been taking any treatment for TB will settle the diagnosis. Any treatment history, for example, the patient might have taken already laser treatment in the past or injections in the past, which are important for you to know for the further management of the patient with diabetic retinopathy. So this is a patient which I'm going to present, male, 54 years, loss of vision in the left eye of 3 months duration, more since 3 weeks. That means initially it was insidious and it has become a little rapid in the last 3 weeks. And then he's diabetic since 12 years on oral hypoglycemic medications with a fair control, not very good control. He's also a known case of hypertension for the last 5 years on treatment with, again, a fair control. Family history, mother had diabetes mellitus, and personal history is not so contributory to the case in question. So this is in brief. Actually, it has already been told by Dr. Sanjay, so I'm not going to the details of the history of presenting illness. Examination, I think, is important. Vision is very, very important in terms of the quantification. You have to actually quantify in a standardized way. You can't say finger counting at 3 meters, finger counting at 4 meters or 6 meters. You have to Snellanize, meaning you have to hold the Snellen's chart at 6 meters. And if the patient is not able to see at 6 meters, bring it closer. The first line, 6 by 60 line, has to be seen, at least the second line. Actually, I prefer the second line to be read. And however much you have to bring the chart closer to the patient, it doesn't matter. You have to make the patient read the second line, and then it becomes accurate. So Snellization is what I call it, not finger counting at 2 meters or 3 meters. You have to ask the patient to read letters or alphabets or numbers. So near vision is important. Contrast sensitivity in certain conditions like CSR becomes important. Amsler's in cases of ARMD becomes important. Color vision for optic neuritis, of course, not in retina, but to differentiate between optic nerve problems and retinal problems. Confrontation fields and PR, projection of rays, is important. It's a crude test, no doubt, but then it gives a lot of information about what is happening in the retina. Grading of the RIPD, if at all it is there. Presence of Seineke is important. NVI, something that is very, very important in a patient with a vasculopathy in the retina, is the presence of NVI. You have to rule out NVI, and certain patients with uveitic conditions can have nodules on the iris as well. So these two important things refer to signs which can give you an information about the posterior segment. Anterior vitreous for cells, Schaeffer's sign, and any blood just behind the lens. Sometimes in a patient with PDR or any vitreous hemorrhage for that matter, you can have blood stuck to the posterior capsule of the lens, usually inferiorly, and that can give you some clue about what is happening in the fundus even before you dilate and see. IOP for hypotonia, again, just like NVI, hypotonia is ominous. The patient has hypotonia, probably you're dealing with a case of retinal detachment, and therefore these anterior segment findings give you a lot of information about what you should expect or can expect in a case of the vasculopathy, for example. So fundoscopy is done with dilated pupils with the IDO 20D lens, with or without sterile depression, depending on what case you're dealing with. And of course, you have to see the macula with a 90D lens as well. And you have to comment on whether the view you are having with the equipment that you're using is good or poor. So this is important because a good view means that you're supposed to see every finding. If the view is poor, then you can be excused for not picking up any sign. And fellow eye examination is also important. If the examiner gives you the option of examining the other eye, please grab it and examine the other eye, because that will give you a lot of information about what is the problem diagnosis. For example, in a case of vitreous hemorrhage, you're not able to see anything. If you examine the other eye, there might be some clue about the diagnosis of the eye in question. General examination is important in a long case. So this is a general examination of my case. Patient is of average build and nourishment and well oriented to time, place, and person. Pulse, all this I think is to be told. BP, respiration, pickle. I hope you all know what pickle is. Pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing, lymphadenopathy, and edema. All this in my case was negative. Systemic examination was within normal limits. Coming to ocular examination, we have to go through the protocol of examination. Head posture, facial symmetry, corneal reflex, whether it was central or not, all this has to be mentioned. And here I would like you to see that I'm not going to tell everything and read everything here on the chart, but what I want you to see is that I'm not able to see my own slide because of my face. Yeah, covering it, right? So is there any way I can minimize this? So iris, you have to again tell about the presence or absence of neovascularization, and a negative finding, no NVI, is a very good thing to write. If you write no NVI, that means you have looked for it. Certain things that the examiner wants you to know and write and look for and write is, one of them is NVI. So in the left eye also there is no NVI. Pupil, usually fundus cases are given in a dilated condition. So you don't have to go after the pupillary reaction. You can tell the pupil was dilated and fixed due to pharmacological dilatation. In this particular patient, the patient had a mild RAPD in the left eye. Lens NS1 because of age, at 54, anyone would have NS1. Anterior vitreous is normal, and the intraocular pressure was 20 and 18 in the right and left eye respectively. So this is a sequence of the findings that you have to present. Fundus description sequence, Dr. Sandhya has already told, I think I'll not repeat. But one thing that you have to tell is that you have seen the patient with the dilated position with the IDO 20D lens, whether you used sterile depression or not, you have to tell, and whether you used 90D lens or not, you have to tell that also. So media again, so media are hazy, or when you say media are hazy, you have to tell which of the media. For example, it may be a corneal opacity, it may be lens opacity, it may be vitreous, or there may be some turbidity in the anterior chamber as well. So you have to be specific about media. And as I said, view of the fundus, whether it was good or not, has to be told, because if it is not good, then you might not be penalized for missing some findings. Disc, everything has been told already. AV ratio, caliber of the vessels is important, because if it is not uniformly, the caliber of the vessel is not uniform, it could be due to a diabetic retinopathy condition where there can be looping, sausaging, reduplication, all those conditions that all those changes that you get in diabetes. And tortuous is something that you get in vein occlusions, which Dr. Sandhya has already told. Then you have to come to so after you finish the media, disc, and vessels, come to the posterior pole. So you have to examine the posterior pole and write and comment on the posterior pole, the area of the retina between the arcades. So this is important in the sequence. So you have to tell about the macula and then about the perimacular area. We'll come to our own case. Then you go to the mid periphery, that is a space between the arcades and the equator. So that is a mid periphery. And then the far periphery, if it is relevant for that particular case. For example, a case of retinal detachment, you have to examine the far periphery, that too with indentation, and that is the zone beyond the equator. So I think this is the sequence that you have to follow for examination of the fundus. So let us come to our case. So disc and other things, I think we will not go through that exercise. It has already been told. Anyway, we'll just do it for this eye and not for the other eye. This is an average size disc. I would not say one disc diameter in size because it can vary from person to person. I would say this is an average size disc, vertically oval, clear margins, color is pink. Cup is ill-defined, although you can see something here. I hope you're able to see the marker, my cursor. Anyway, the cup is not well defined. The vessels on the disc are normal. So this is the sequence of the disc description. And then the vessels along the arcades. You have to describe the vessels along all the four arcades, especially the temporal arcades. So the superior temporal arcades are normal. The inferior arcade, however, shows a slight dilatation of the vein. As compared to the artery, it is not 2:3, it is about 2:4. So this is something that is very marked in this patient and stands out as a finding. And then there are dot and blot hemorrhages all over the posterior pole. The macula itself has a dull reflex, but otherwise is normal. There are some hard exudates between the arcade, below the superior arcade and above the superior arcade as well. So you can see the dot and blot hemorrhages on the superior nasal aspect of the fundus also. Coming to the little mid-peripheral area, you can see that about 3 disc diameters from the fovea along the superior temporal arcade, there is an area of arborizing vessels, a neovascular area of arborizing vessels extending for about 5 to 6 disc diameters vertically and about 2 to 3 disc diameters horizontally, roughly quadrilateral in shape, straddling the superior arcade. So this is something at around the zone, just beyond zone 1, the ROP zones, if you know, you can use the word zone here because that gives a good impression about the examiner can actually imagine what exactly you're talking about and where exactly the lesion is, just outside zone 1. So that is 3 disc diameters from the fovea here. So this is an area of flat neovascularization with arborizing new vessels. Similar area of arborizing new vessels is seen along the inferotemporal arcade, about 3 disc diameters from the fovea, straddling the inferotemporal arcade, and this measures about 2 disc diameters horizontally and vertically, more or less squarish in shape. Then there is something here in the periphery. You can see these are white lines. I hope you're able to see my cursor. Can anybody answer? KP, is my cursor seen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So,
Yes, sir.
So this is sclerosed vessel. Whether it's a vein or an artery is difficult to tell because of the caliber. I can't make out, it's very thin. So this is a sclerosed vessel in the periphery, which is approximately just posterior to the equator perhaps. And here is another sclerosed vessel. So this completes more or less the description of the right eye fundus. This is the drawing that you have to make. It's important to make a drawing for all these. Just look at the right hand drawing. The left hand is only meant to show you that the hospital's name, the date, patient's details, the MRD number, which eye, which doctor has seen and who has signed. All this has to be noted down. But this is, look at the right hand drawing where the arborization of the vessels is shown in green and streaked with red. So this is something like exactly like what you saw in the fundus examination. So you have to label each of them. A flat NVE is what has been seen and labeled here. And this sclerosed vessels. So sclerosed vessels are shown as dotted lines here. So that different ways of denoting sclerosed vessels. I think we will stick to this for this presentation. And then the dot and blot hemorrhages are seen with not many in number actually, but they are there, and they are there in almost all the 4 quadrants. So this is about the right eye. Coming to the left eye, so here again the disc will not go into the details of all that size, color and shape, but then it is enough to say that there is some fibrous tissue covering the disc. There is fibrous tissue covering the disc, which is elevated, the fibrous tissue is elevated, and it is fanning out along the arcades, along the superior arcade and along the inferior arcade to an area temporal to the macular area, and it fans out along in the superior temporal arcade to about 4 to 6 disc areas in size and about 6 to 8 disc areas in size inferiorly. So, and with a bridge of fibrous tissue between the two complexes of fibrous tissue here, which is about 1 disc diameter in width. So this is the description of this area. Similarly, there are some neovascularizations which are extending nasally along the horizontal raphe with large network of vessels, arborizing vessels. And this extension is up to about 4 to 5 disc diameters towards the periphery. And you can see that there are areas of neovascularization here, and superiorly, suggestive of flat neovascularization in those areas. And of course, there are these dot and blot hemorrhages everywhere in the fundus, though not many. But you look at the subhyaloid hemorrhage here, a hemorrhagic area just temporal, just nasal to this fibrous tissue complex here, and the subhyaloid hemorrhage in the equatorial region, more or less in the equatorial region, maybe slightly posterior to it. So this is the description of the left eye. Apart from that, you have some folds here. You have some internal limiting membrane folds, linear striae, which is suggestive of a lifted retina. And more importantly, there is an area of traction retinal detachment involving the macula because of the fibrous tissue pulling on the retina here. So this is a pale area which on indirect ophthalmoscope you can make out this is a 2D image, but you need a 3D image or at least a stereoscopic fundus examination with the IDO to detect this area which is detached. And you can see that from the vessel that is coming down here, crossing the fovea, you can see that this is not the fovea here. Normally the fovea should be here, but it has become ectopic. The fovea has become ectopic and dragged inferiorly, and that also is detached. I'll just show you the diagram that I made. So the diagram shows everything. The fibrous tissue on the disc, extension along the arcades, the fibrous tissue fanning out superiorly and inferiorly, and the bridge of tissue here, and the traction detachment causing macular detachment, and the ectopic fovea which is drawn here. So this is the ectopic fovea, and the subhyaloid hemorrhage, the dot and blot hemorrhage is here, and the nasal NVE that I was mentioning with the fibrous tissue. And if you see closely, I've drawn some in green. I have drawn some shading here, which is to denote that there is a thick fibrous membrane spanning the posterior pole between the disc and the temporal retina. So this is a thin, faint appearing ERM that is spanning between the disc and the temporal retina. So this whole area is drawn as green shading, which I don't know whether you can make out on the screen there. Okay, and everything has to be labeled. It's important to label. So probable diagnosis, I would say, because I would say that this is a high risk PDR, proliferative diabetic retinopathy in the right eye. In the left eye is high risk proliferative diabetic retinopathy with TRD involving the macula. Mind you, the right eye has 6x6 vision, and yet we are calling it high risk PDR because of the sheer size of the neovascularization that we are seeing in that eye. You saw those big areas of neovascularization. So HRC PDR, or nowadays called as severe PDR, because it is no longer high risk because of the availability of the technology and the instrumentation in the present day. We are able to tackle any PDR, however severe it might appear to be, and therefore high risk PDR is something that is not in vogue in the present day. It is severe PDR. So because the patient is diabetic with a duration of 12 years, not so well controlled, he has dot and blot hemorrhages, all characteristics of diabetic retinopathy he has in form of neovascularization, fibrovascular proliferation with TRD, and a subhyaloid hemorrhage. All this would make the diagnosis of the PDR, proliferative diabetic retinopathy. The DDs, the question that will arise in the exam would be, what are the differential diagnoses? Once you make a provisional diagnosis, they will ask, what is the differential diagnosis for this patient? So hypertensive retinopathy. So in hypertensive retinopathy, the predominant finding will be flame-shaped hemorrhages, AV crossing changes, cottonwood spots. And one thing about the cottonwood spots in diabetic retinopathy and hypertensive retinopathy in terms of how they differ is that in hypertensive retinopathy, they are smaller, they are whiter, and they are around the disc. So it's important to look at the characteristics of the cottonwood spots and try to differentiate the cottonwood spots of hypertensive retinopathy from those of diabetic retinopathy. It could be a vein occlusion, especially a BRVO results in severe proliferation, fibrovascular tissue and TRD. It could be one thing that mimics diabetic retinopathy so much that sometimes it is confusing is radiation retinopathy. So a history of radiation is very important to take to rule out radiation retinopathy, because both of them can be absolutely similar. So vasculitis is another differential diagnosis, but again, the age of the patient and the posterior location of the findings. In a vasculitis, the findings will all be peripheral most of the time, and the patient will be younger. Ocular ischemia syndrome is something where proliferation does not occur, but hemorrhages will be there in the mid-periphery, and that is what sometimes can be mistaken for diabetic retinopathy. Sickle cell retinopathy and hemoglobinopathies are extremely rare and not difficult to differentiate. What ancillary tests would you do for this patient is another question that might come. So OCT I will do to evaluate the right eye macula. I think the patient has 6x6 vision. It's not mandatory to do an OCT, but just for completion's sake, and maybe because the foveal reflex was dull, I will do an OCT in the right eye. And definitely I will evaluate the left eye macula. The left eye macula is ectopic, it is dragged down, it is detached. Therefore, I would like to see where the membranes are, how the macula is being pulled, what effect of this pull is there on the macula in terms of whether it has caused cystoid changes or schisis effect. All this has to be evaluated, and therefore I do an OCT for the left eye. Ultrasound again to evaluate the left eye macula in terms of how much it is detached. OCT will tell us how much it is detached. Ultrasound also can be used. Will you use FFA? Will you do FFA for these patients? No, there's no need for an FFA. FFA is done only when you are in doubt whether there is PDR or not. And this patient has frank neovascularization in the right eye, and let alone neovascularization, there is fibrous tissue. There is severe fibrous tissue, fibrovascular proliferation in the left eye, which does not need an FFA to diagnose as a case of PDR, and therefore FFA has no role in this particular patient. Coming to management. So always start with saying, co-manage the patient, send him to a physician or a nephrologist for the comorbidities that the patient may be having, and get this patient evaluated systemically. So all the systemic factors have to be looked at. That doesn't mean that the patient can go away and come back only after a month for the ocular treatment. So that is why I say co-manage, meaning patient can be seen simultaneously by both the ophthalmologist and physician and treated by the respective departments. Right eye, I will treat with laser PRP, starting inferiorly, because I think it's very obvious, everyone knows the answer. Already there is high risk PDR, meaning that is high risk for bleeding, and therefore, if you start the laser superiorly or elsewhere, and if the patient bleeds between sessions, you will not be able to treat the inferior retina, and therefore you start off inferiorly, so that even if he bleeds, you have the superior retina visible for you to laser. So starting inferiorly and completion within 2 sittings, use LIO if necessary for the far periphery. In this particular patient in the right eye, you have to treat the PRP rather aggressively because of the sheer size of the neovascularization that you have on hand. And therefore, it's very important that you be aggressive and not do a half-hearted PRP. Follow up a month later to look for regression of the neovascularization and look for the need for more treatment. And advise no physical strain for a month. So physical strain in the form of lifting weights, bending suddenly, coughing, sneezing, or even these patients are sometimes constipated. A hard stool can result in increased venous pressure in the head and neck area and can cause bleeding in the eye. So these are things small things which need to be told to the patient after laser treatment or even before laser treatment because of the fear of bleeding. Left eye definitely needs surgery because there is a TRD. If there was no TRD, probably would have done a peripheral laser photocoagulation to the areas which are not detached. In fact, the peripheral retina is available for laser treatment and therefore can be done even before surgery. It makes sense to do laser treatment to the peripheral retina in this patient. And before surgery, we will give a pre-operative intravitreal bevacizumab or ranibizumab. So that is to cause regression of the intravitreal Avastin or Lucentis or Accentrix, the areas which are not because of the fear of bleeding. Left eye definitely needs surgery because there is a TRD. If there was no TRD, probably would have done a peripheral laser photocoagulation to the areas which are not detached. In fact, the peripheral retina is available for laser treatment and therefore can be done even before surgery. It makes sense to do laser treatment to the peripheral retina in this patient. And before surgery, we will give a pre-operative intravitreal bevacizumab or ranibizumab. So that is to cause regression of the neovascularization that the patient has, which the laser cannot regress so soon. Therefore, you give an intravitreal Avastin or Lucentis or Accentrix, depending on the patient's economic condition, cause regression of the vessels so that the fibrous tissue gets consolidated, the fibrous tissue becomes less vascular, less florid in terms of the neovascularization component, and it becomes easier for you to operate without much bleeding. But most important, before surgery, take a physician's clearance. Before even the injection, take a physician's clearance and have a physician as a standby if possible. And what surgery you will do? Vitrectomy plus membrane surgery, use of PFCL to flatten the TRD, do an endo laser and use a tamponade. A tamponade is not compulsory, but in this particular patient who has a thick fibrous tissue, there is a possibility that he might have bleeding, he might have breaks during the dissection of this fibrous tissue. By MS, I mean membrane surgery. And therefore, during dissection, there can be occurrence of breaks, which might need long-term tamponade. And therefore, you use gas or silicone oil, depending on the area of breaks that have occurred. So other questions that if I have 2-3 minutes, I think I can just go to the other questions. Is it okay?
Part of the general discussion later, sir.
Okay. So this is in short the case presentation, including discussion about the diagnosis, differential diagnosis, and management of this patient. So we can take up questions as and when there are questions from the audience.
Thank you very much, sir. That was extremely beneficial for our PGs. I think all the panelists can probably unmute themselves. Dr. Khurana,
Yes, sir.
how frequent is diabetic retinopathy as a fundus case? And I want to ask, what is the difference between the retina case in DNB versus MS? In DNB, is it a short case or a long case?
In DNB, there is nothing like long case or short case. There are anterior segment cases, there are posterior segment cases. So there are total 4 cases and all are of equal marks. And
Okay.
you have to write almost like a medium case, you can say, small history also and the finding also. And diabetic retinopathy, I think it's almost a universal case to be given. So if there are 4 patients, students, maybe 1 or 2 will definitely get one of the fundus case diabetic retinopathy or vein occlusion or ARMDs. These are the very common. So I think we have included vein occlusion and diabetic retinopathy cases along with the mixed that is hypertensive retinopathy also. If the students are well versed with these, in the posterior segment case, they are going to get very good marks.
So that means a fundus case is a must in DNB or it is optional?
It is must.
It's a must.
What about MS?
It is a must.
Yes.
MS?
In MS also.
But that is a short case there.
In MS depends on the university. In our institution, we have made almost equal marks.
Okay.
Krishna Prasad, 25 marks will be for fundus case in MS exams. two
Because,
case, 25 marks each will be in MS in a lot of universities. As sir said, it
because
may
to,
vary.
It may vary. Okay.
Krishna, to be very frank, when we were students, at that time, posterior segment was not so well developed. There were no lasers, no angiography, no OCT. Now, a lot of has come in the posterior segment examination. So it is more has become more important even than anterior segment for an ophthalmologist to be familiar with. So this
And
being
another
even
thing,
more
Krishna
important.
Prasad, is like when you have your long case, you have to examine the fundus also. In your
Yes,
long case, you
that's
have to do fundus and refraction. So fundus is a part of your long case, and you have two fundus cases. So it is almost like 1/3 of your entire MS exam is like fundus case, I would say.
Posterior segment. Dr. Grover,
and
sir,
Yes. Yes.
uh, the patient always comes dilated, or you have to dilate the patients in retina cases like?
We would always keep the patients dilated if it is a fundus case. What we are also doing is keep one case for the examination of posterior fundus with 90D or whatever you want to use for it. We normally would insist on a 90D examination, and one for indirect ophthalmoscopy, one with peripheral findings like a retinal detachment or something. So we normally have two cases amongst the cases that we keep for DNB.
And sometimes if there is a gonioscopy or a iris neovascularization, then the student has to tell that I would like to do it after when the pupil constricts. That's what you expect.
Yeah. If it is a case, generally when we keep a case for fundus, we expect them to do just fundus, so that we are not particularly insisting on other things in that particular patient. In FRCS, of course, it's very well directed. You are told, please examine the right eye of this patient with 90D and keep describing your findings as you see them. And they're very particular that you would describe exactly as both the retina surgeons were describing, exact location, exact edema.
They both can take the FRCS now, you mean? Okay. Dr. Rajalingam, can you unmute yourself? So what about the OCT? Do you have also they give you OCT findings or the charts of the same patient, or it is not a part of the case, or it
no,
is
it's
this?
not.
The OCT, suppose in case of anything, is it a CRVO or a diabetic retinopathy, and the OCT picture should be carried along with the patient case. So because we have to ask the candidates about what are the findings of the OCT and what are the types of the classification of the OCT depending on the OCT pictures. So so on and so on, OCT pictures are compulsory.
Okay.
For the management also, it is very compulsory.
Okay. So it's better that students know how to read the OCT.
Yeah, that is compulsory.
Krishna, it's better that the student must know how to read. But for a fundus case, we usually just ask theoretically, not very, because OCT portion is in the VAVA itself. They have to describe so many things.
As sir said, OCT, FFA, ultrasound will all be in the Viva. For the given fundus case, I don't think actually in some of the exams they deter you from looking at any of the records that a patient has. You are supposed to just clinically assess.
Clinically analyze.
Yeah, because
Clinical,
90-day examination and picking up macular edema would be given more weightage. Anyone will look at OCT and say there is edema. But if you can pick it up on 90D, and in fact, the toughest thing is to say it's a normal fundus in fundus case, And as sir was saying, in FRCS exams, normal fundus is kept, and it's so tricky to call it normal. So, we want the student to know whether there is macular edema or not. So, no, I think no diagnostic clues will be given for a fundus case. That is a different section altogether.
I think we have one presentation today by Dr. Srinivas on how to read these retina charts, OCT or USD. I think that will be very useful. One question to Dr. Sahasranamam, sir. So what about the retina drawings? Are the students given those Amsler Du Bois charts, or they got to write a freehand drawing?
No. They are given the Amsler Du Bois charts, and most of the centers they do that. And almost I think now all the candidates like Gurana sir said, no, now that we are this drawing has become a routine. All the students now draw, and as Dr. Santhia and Gurana sir was saying, along with this fundus description, we don't ask for imaging picture, and the patients will not be having. Only thing that will be discussed separately. So
Okay.
this is purely clinical, indirect 90-day examination findings, and how you discuss that. So along with that OCT things, maybe asked, but the candidates will not be shown the OCT and discussed along with this session.
Okay. So
Epi-
thank you very much, sir. Yeah.
Sorry to butt. Another short fundus case is retinitis pigmentosa.
Yeah.
It
And
will
we'll
be.
come to that in the
Okay.
section 2, actually.
KP, one more point I want to add actually.
Please.
See, basically, at least for the next examination, that is the RGHS examination, more than a clinical scenario, I think it will be a digital scenario. In the sense, probably what will happen, we'll have to give a case scenario or just a video of a particular test, and we'll be going in depth for each and every point in that case scenario.
We
So
OSCE.
just like an OSCE,
Or
and
even
even
a virtual patient.
it will be a model case like what Dr. Sandhya presented initially, and the students have to be acquiring knowledge in depth. That is what I feel. If you have got a physical case in front of you, it is easy for you to impress the examiner. Digitally, if a scenario is given, the depth of knowledge of the student has to be very deep.
Exactly. So we used to actually, for our I-8 exams, we had in February, we had given 12 digital cases to the students. I think that is going to be a reality. That was supposed to be for training. I think
Yeah.
they are going to be a reality.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I think with this, we come to the next batch of cases. We have Dr. Abhishek Baudekar, our uvea and cornea specialist from MM Joshi Eye Institute. So he will be giving a short case of uvea cases. So